All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Pieces guest speaker series. Today's guest is Doug Taylor. Doug is an e-learning CPD instructor at Learn Formula, or CPD for Law, and he's been involved with OPA since 2013, serving on the Government and Law Society of Ontario Relations, Events, and Communications Committee. Doug brings over a decade of experience with Ontario Small Claims Court and paralegal experience in public sector administrative law, primarily within the context of regulatory compliance-based legal environments, and now recently in charge of the Education Committee there at the OPA. So thank you so much, Doug, for joining us today. And perhaps maybe you can tell us a little bit more about your background and about your new role there at the Ontario Paralegal Association.
Sure. Thank you so much, Jean-Paul. It's a real pleasure to join you. I appreciate the extension of the offer to come and appear. I also like to thank El Esteban as well for the opportunity to come and speak. I can say I had not heard of this program before. She had mentioned it, and anytime as a licensee you can come out and talk about law with the public, I think it's a great thing. And we need more of it, and it helps increase access to justice. So, yeah, with that, I guess I'll give that was sort of the Coles Notes version. And without going too much over time, I guess a little bit more higher level background for me. I've got about 20 years of experience in the technology industry. Now, currently, I'm a P1 licensee, commissioner of oaths as well. I'm also a registered notary public. So having spent about 20 years in the technology industry, I've had a number of roles in that industry. I've owned my own businesses. I've had several successful small businesses. And then I decided to join the corporate world as an employee. So I spent a little bit over 15 years in the financial services industry and did a whole wide range of opportunities there, including being a licensed financial advisor. What I found was in that work I was doing, I was always being drawn to law. And so then I had an opportunity to go back to school at 40 years old and obtained my paralegal degree from Humber College, the 4-year paralegal degree program, and was licensed in 2016. So I've been licensed as a paralegal since 2016. And as you indicated in your introduction there, essentially I've focused the majority of my work corporately, or at least on the employee side, in the self-regulating bodies of administrative law. Most recently, about 3 weeks ago, I guess, I was elected to chair the Education Committee at the Ontario Paralegal Association. And so this is the first time I'm actually chairing a committee there. I've been involved with them for many, many years in all kinds of different roles and all kinds of different committees. And so this is the first opportunity for me to actually lead a committee. And of course, with COVID and the pandemic, education has gathered new light, and there's a good spotlight on a lot of the remote work that's going on. So for me, it's an opportunity to bring my technology skills along with my leadership skills to that role and help increase the competency for our members.
So what in terms of what are you looking to do in terms of the education and you just mentioned increase the competency? What are some ideas you have and what are some areas in particular for newly licensed paralegals, as there's been quite a few coming out in the last year, in terms of providing them with that mentorship and guidance that they need through the OPA?
Yeah, well, through the Education Committee, our mandate for that committee is to provide the minimum required CPD hours to meet the licensing requirements annually for the Law Society of Ontario. That's our minimum mandate. However, we now, since I've been in this role the last 3 weeks, we have some initiatives coming out to expand education. For me, education is more than just meeting those minimum requirements that are required for licensing annually. with the Law Society, and really shifting the mindset away from I have these hours and I have to do them to get them into my Law Society portal. And I guess a little bit of background for those that aren't licensed yet. Once you become licensed, there is a minimum requirement of CPD, which is a formal requirement to maintain your licensing with the Law Society of Ontario. And as you complete that continuing professional development, short form CPD, you have to report those activities into your Law Society portal underneath when you log in under your licensing. So my goal is to expand that and really help bridge the gap for students moving into the licensing phase and becoming licensed and then out practicing as paralegals. So right now, there's a good body of work for licensed paralegals who are practitioners, licensed paralegals who are operating in the legal services industry, and there's a good number of CPDs for students. Where I see the gap is the gap of that transition from student to paralegal. And for me personally, what bridged the gap for me was volunteering. I essentially, as a student, blocked off 1 day a week where I spent 3 to 4 hours in that day shadowing a mentor in court. So basically, I tagged along with them as a student, followed them along everywhere, made lots of notes, and watched and actually saw what that paralegal was doing. So I did that for an entire year, and that really helped me connect the theory of law to the practice of law. And as you know, being in this industry long enough, there's a huge gap there. So that's sort of the focus of the committee, is to sort of bridge that gap. And it's going to require more than just running CPDs. That is, of course, a component of it. But we're also looking at extending mentorship program and fostering a learning environment to encompass a lot more aspects of education. I'm a firm believer, I'm a lifelong learner, I'm a firm believer in constantly learning. And I believe that that helps improve yourself. And if you can improve yourself, then you're better equipped to provide legal services to the public. So to translate that through to the Education Committee, we have a number of initiatives on the table this year that we're hoping to bridge that gap between students and working professionals.
Sounds like a great initiative. I think. What do you think with respect to? I mean, we've been pretty much remote almost for the last year. How
Yeah.
does that impact? I know previously they would have Saturday events in person where you'd have the CPD events and a chance to network with other members. But what ideas do you have with respect to it may be some time before you can have in-person kinds of events? What can be done about that with us being remote?
Yeah, it's been a huge challenge. And you've been in the industry long enough, and you'll know this. For those that are just coming into it, or students that haven't been acquainted with the industry yet, there's a large portion of the industry that is law, rules, and procedure based. But 80% of this industry is people, just like any other industry. So you're working with judges and court administrators, and at the end of the day, it's all people. So it's all interacting. That has, as you know, had a landslide of change in the last year. And that has also impacted our ability to make those personal connections at CPDs. So one of the things we've done at the Ontario Paralegal Association is we've set up virtual rooms. So in a sense, instead of having those events where you can come and interact on a personal one-to-one, we've set up open access for our members where they can book a room with a mentor or someone they may want to chat with, maybe is working in that area of the law, or if they're a student or a new licensee, then maybe they want to connect with their mentor and they want to have some of that personal connection, some of that visual that comes along with it. And so we facilitated the ability for them to meet in a Zoom environment, very informally. And then we also have another level, which is a little bit more formal, and that is we're going to be running weekly sessions based on a particular area of practice. So whether it be WSIB or small claims, and we'll have a senior paralegal host that informal meeting, and there'll be lots of back and forth. So as opposed to an official formal CPD with the panel lineup and the agenda, this will be more of a free form back and forth open question period. And that will approximate the same type of interactions you would get personally at a CPD event with other members. So this is a great initiative for us, and we think it will help alleviate, as you duly noted, that component of interacting with colleagues and mentors face to face in a more personal environment.
Now, beyond that, are there any other things, I mean, not just on the education side, but certainly on the mentorship that the OPA can do further in light of the fact that we're missing the people component, right? In terms of there are a lot of, especially I find paralegals, a lot more are sole proprietors, right, running their own practice and going to court. I mean, even for me, when you would go to court would be the social aspect, meeting the other colleagues at the bar, in the courthouse there, but you're not seeing that as much, obviously, with most things being remote or almost everything being remote. What can be done about keeping people more further connected in these times?
Yeah, I think you raised a great point. We have an upcoming CPD next week. So I think, again, part of the education is not just on the substantive portions of the law. So our CPD coming up next week is about mental health. And it's a huge impact to our community, the paralegal community, the legal community, larger legal community is no exception. Lots of folks are suffering. There's been lots of challenges with this new environment, and it's creating a lot of additional stressors that never existed prior to COVID. And so, again, for us, it's about educating individuals on the ability to recognize those stressors when they're applying them to themselves, when those stressors act as triggers, and then looking at the resources that are available in the community. The resources look a little different. They're delivered in a different format than previously. And I think for us, it's education and raising awareness. As you know, if you're, as a paralegal, if you're providing legal services to the public and you're struggling yourself to manage some of your own personal challenges you're having around COVID and some of the current financial situation, then you're not in the best position to provide the best service to the public. And so I think a lot of times that notion is lost, and a CPD is immediately associated with a particular field of law or a particular substantive topic on that law. And so we're trying to broaden that definition of a CPD to also include mental health, improving mental health, looking at resources that are available in the community. For example, the Member Assistance Program at the Law Society of Ontario. This is a publicly funded program for any licensee in the province that is struggling or needs someone to talk to on an emotional side, not necessarily wants to go into a long enrolled counseling. Maybe it's just a quick question. Maybe it's a stressor. Maybe it's, I have this idea of how to try and increase my revenue, but I don't know how this will fit into my business model. Maybe, you are struggling with the components, as you suggest, you're struggling with that lack of connectiveness to people. And so this is a resource that's available. It's funded by the Law Foundation of Ontario. I know their numbers have increased about 55% since the beginning of COVID. So there's a huge demand for that. So that would be one example of expanding the scope of CPDs, not just to include substantive topics on a particular field of law, but also look at practitioners as people, as individuals, and understanding that um, a good mind leads to good business, and a good mind and good business leads to providing the best possible service to the public. So I think connecting those dots in CPDs like we're doing on the good mental health will help expand the conception of what constitutes a CPD.
Thank you for bringing up mental health, and certainly it's sometimes overlooked, and part of it is we are licensees looking to take on and solving problems of our clients that sometimes we're reluctant to admit that we have our own issues that we have to deal with that are with the stress of the practice, or in light of COVID-19, there's no additional stressors there. Um,
Absolutely.
what more in terms of addressing mental health? I know it's great that there's CPD coming up next week, but beyond the events that can be people being able there to reach out to others. I mean, certainly the member assistance program by the Law Society, free confidential service, um, great thing and for the paralegal students listening, it is also available to you as students. And
That's
again,
right.
it's external to the college. So if you have any issues, uh, certainly you can reach out to them. But beyond things like that, is there anything more within the paralegal community, especially that we can do to address these situations, and the feelings of anxiety right now with we're going into almost our first full year coming up in a few more weeks with
Yeah.
COVID. What more can we be doing?
I think one of the key components is maintaining that sense of community. And for paralegals, it's always been a core component of the work they do as licensees. And I would assume it's the same for lawyers in the same way. And so as organizations, it's been a struggle for us. We've had to think outside the box and be very creative. Uh, so while it's been a struggle, it's also presented some opportunities. So one of the things, for example, that we're doing is having regular calls, and not formalized structured calls, informal calls. For example, our president is opening up a room on Zoom where any of the members can join, and it's more of a fireside chat environment. There's no topics, there's no agenda, it's not a formal presentation, it's just a chance to vent, it's a chance to relax. Everything's off the record, we're not taking minutes. So it provides a sense of community. And I think that's really important to emphasize, as you indicated. If you're facing these challenges, you're not alone. You're certainly not alone. And it doesn't, talking about it is the number one key, I think, to addressing it, is talking about it and having it out and in the open, and not something that, well, I don't want to admit that I'm really struggling because, it may give the impression that I'm not being successful. And so that mindset needs to be completely shifted. And how we do that is giving opportunities, more opportunities at every chance to interact in an informal way and reinstill that sense of community. Um, I still get that sense from volunteering, but as you pointed out as well, colleges are very excellent. All the colleges are very excellent at providing services for students in and around mental health, and they have been for many years. They've actually been, I would say, an industry leader in that way. And some of the other nonprofit organizations and corporate organizations are, in a sense, playing catch up in that area. So I think looking to the colleges for how they've set up their structures to support students, um, and not even necessarily struggling with mental health, just the awareness, raising the awareness, being aware of what the triggers are, and the benefits of being aware and having that sense of community. And so it's still virtual. We're not in person, but it is. This is one of the ways that we're extending the opportunity to feel like you're connected still as part of the community.
Now, one of my students just was asking, if I'm presuming they're a student member of OPA. Are those virtual rooms that you were mentioning, are they open to the student members, or are they just for the full practicing?
Yeah, it's for any member of the Ontario Paralegal Association. So if you're a student member, if you're a voting member, if you're a non-voting member, as long as you're a member of the Ontario Paralegal Association, this is a free resource the organization's providing. And again, for us, I mean, I'm personally a big believer in connection and communication. And I think having these open rooms where there's no agenda, there's no end goal other than trying to connect and having an opportunity maybe to vent, maybe having an opportunity to bring a great idea to the table. It gives a sense of community and belonging to that community, and knowing that you can count on your fellow colleagues when you're in a time of need and need to reach out. So it's certainly open to anybody who is a member with the Ontario Paralegal Association. And I'm assuming the OBA has similar structured programs there as well, although we have not recently reached out to them to have a discussion with them on how they're addressing the current environment. The challenge, of course, with paralegals are depth of resources is a lot more lean, let's put it in that terms, than the OBA. We certainly have a lot less practitioners in the province, and but regardless of that, there's still the structure and the purpose and goals. I think there is definitely some common ground between the OPA and the OBA in this regard.
Now, I know you put on a number of e-learning programs there for CPDs. Perhaps we can share some advice for students who are now. I have a few students who are just starting the program, and actually Monday was their very first day. So, what advice for them in terms of getting used to learning in an e-learning sort of environment or online remote environment, a lot different than being in person in the classroom. So what have you found in delivering content via the web through webcast that has been very helpful for that I can pass along to them?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me, and I'm now we'll put the hat or the look through the lens of an organizer or as a presenter, is having multiple channels in which you can interact with your audience. So in the old days, maybe it was fine just to have a video recorded CPD, and that was great, maybe a poll or two. In this day and age, to really engage the audience, it's almost mandatory now that you provide multiple ways to reach out and connect with that audience. Because again, you're trying to drive the connection, and particularly what we're doing in the education committee, we're trying to connect with the members. For us, it's more than just delivering content. It's connecting with them and really producing a sense of community. If I am a participant, what I would recommend is reaching out. A lot of times we get questions after the CPD has ended. So as an organizer, I try to find alternate ways to extend opportunities to ask questions. So it may be the presenters will take questions after the fact. It may be that I gather them together and do a subsequent follow-up. So it's always having that open communication channel and various multiple opportunities to have that interaction. And I think that really drives more of a sense of community, which is something that is almost demanded now in this environment with the lack of in-person, and it's still very challenging. It's by no means are we anywhere close to what it was in person, and some things are just they're intangible. You can't gather those even on a video call. You can't gather the full scope of body language, etc., on a video call. So there's always going to be some shortcomings, but I think the key component is having multiple ways to reach out to the audience, multiple avenues, whether it's through polls, whether it's interactive, following up after the CPD, allowing breakout discussion rooms that follow the CPD. And then what we've done is we've seen, okay, we've got lots of activity, lots of folks are asking questions after that CPD. Maybe we should open a chat video, have some senior paralegals come into that chat video, and let's just have a discussion about it. So it's providing those above and beyond components that complement the CPD. If I'm someone that's receiving the information, again, it's just finding ways to reach out, whether it's through Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook. Use all the tools that are available to you to try and find a way to reach out and connect. And so I would not hesitate as a participant if I had further questions to reach out to the organizer and just say, hey, I've got some other questions. Can I get more information? Just maintain that connection with them going forward. I can say as a presenter myself, I really appreciate when the participants reach out because it adds real value to the work I'm doing.
Now, in terms of maybe some substantive stuff here, you have a lot of experience, all facets there in small claims court, for example. What for some of my students who may be looking to get into that particular field, maybe first we could start off. What do you think is different if you're going to be? I don't think small claims court is fully open, but there are still some.
It is not. No.
There are still some tribunals, in particular, like the landlord-tenant the tribunal, where they are open kind of virtually. Is there any difference in terms of preparing and being in front of a judge or deputy judge or justice of the peace or member virtually versus being in person, kind of to replicate the environment that we are learning now in?
Oh my gosh, yeah, that's a whole, I don't know how much time you have, John Paul. It is a completely different universe, completely different. Essentially law has been operating in this system for hundreds of years. And so COVID has really turned the entire industry on its head. There are plenty of challenges, from the simplest things of losing internet connection, having some administrators not being quite technically savvy as they were in the old world of doing business. It runs a gamut from having potentially, and these are some other stories that were shared, having witnesses who are being coached off camera. So, I mean, it just creates a whole wide range of issues. And one thing we've been really inspired with is the Ministry of the Attorney General's office this year. Through the pandemic, we feel that they've really led the change and have been a real leader in trying to get some of these reforms from a very basic level in place, some of the infrastructure in place. But of course, as you mentioned, it's always the people side. So you can have the best equipment, the best technology available. At the end of the day, you're working with people. When you're dealing with opposing sides and you're dealing with judge, you're dealing with people. When you're dealing with clerks, you're dealing with people. And some folks are more adaptive to change than others, as you know. And so you get a whole wide range of spectrum on that end as well. So not only are you dealing with the technology changes, you're dealing with the people changes, personality changes. When I say personality changes, there are some folks that are quicker than others. Some folks struggle with it. A lot of judges and chairs have taken additional training for the technology side. So that's less of a challenge with them, but it's still a struggle for maintaining some sense of normalcy in the process, because it is evolving, and literally weekly there seems to be a change either in process or something fundamentally is changing. And so as a whole, I think our industry is not has traditionally not been best suited to deal with change, rapid change, quickly. And so this has been a huge challenge for the minister, and I think him and his office have done a wonderful job going from having everything shut down, everything, to having most parts up and running, although sporadically. And now, with of course, with the recent lockdown, we've been back down in operating. But I don't know about you, perhaps I can get your thoughts on it. I never in my lifetime would I ever imagine that the entire justice system in Canada would be shut down, at least in Ontario, where the entire justice system would be shut down. And that's in fact what happened at the beginning of the pandemic, as you probably recall. Never in my wildest dreams, I don't think any of my colleagues would ever imagine a day when all the tribunals and all the courts are completely closed. So that the reason I mention that, it sort of gives a gravity to the weight of what we're dealing with. So the enormity of that change is huge. And there's all kinds, all kinds. For me, what I found the best practice is connecting with mentors and senior folks in the community. So even for myself, I still consider myself a new licensee. I've only been licensed since 2016. In my mind, I'm still a new licensee. And so when I can reach out to my mentors and talk to them about, for example, there was a story, one of my mentors said, I know they were being coached. The witness is calling in remote. I know they're being coached because I can hear a voice in the background coaching them. So how do you deal with that? I mean, there's no, so substantively, that's not something you learn about in school. That's not the way law is supposed to work. So that's just one small example, but there are tons of those types of examples. And so what I find most beneficial is connecting with somebody who is in the trenches doing the work, out representing, and they can provide better gauge on what successes they've encountered, what successes they've come across in their practical application of servicing their clients. And there's no shortage of stories, and there's no shortage of challenges. Unfortunately, there's no, if I had the answer to that question, Trumbull, I probably wouldn't be sitting here. I'd be somewhere else, because that's a huge, huge challenge. But that's one of the things I found that's been the most beneficial, is connecting with senior practitioners in the community and finding out, well, how are they managing it? How, what are they doing to manage? And these are all brand new areas. Times they're actually saying to the judge, Your Honor, there's somebody coaching, I can hear them in the background. I mean, you would never, that's not something that would ever come into play in a courtroom, ever. It just wouldn't happen. So this is a brand new environment. There is brand new things happening because we are people and people are people. And so a lot of it is adapting and you drawing on experience. So this is where I say reaching out to senior members in the community is really a good barometer for dealing with some of these issues until we can get some more systemic changes put in place.
I do think there's certainly some benefits that I've seen, mainly set date court, for criminal
Yes.
matters. I recall having, sometimes having to go to Peterborough or Lindsay, or now I can just turn on my computer at 8:59 and I'm ready to go in court. I mean, I think there's some of those things should hopefully stick around. And as well, the other
Yeah.
thing that some of my students may recall, we were able to tune into the case of Therio, and I think there's about 20,000 or so people from around, I'm presuming around the country, listening in to Justice DeLuca render the decision there, that otherwise, unless you're elbowing your way through, the Toronto Star and the Globe and Mail reporters, you're not going to get your way into those small courtrooms. Typically, if you wanted to hear the decision, so.
Yeah,
Certainly,
absolutely.
there are some advantages, and I would agree with the Attorney General with things like case lines, and maybe you could actually talk a bit about some of the changes that I think for paralegals in particular benefited with virtual commissioning, for example, being able to become notaries a little bit more easily.
Yeah, absolutely. I there's always half full, half empty analogies. I tend to be eternally optimistic. And so when I see all these what seem like insurmountable challenges, at the same time, they're also plentiful opportunities. So this is a real time in this field, probably a time we haven't seen for hundreds and hundreds of years, where nothing is off the table. So there's great opportunities to think about new ways of doing business. And I think the ministry has done a wonderful job in this area. Things like filings, there was, I think the days of going to court, looking at the list that's hanging on the wall, seeing that you're number 55 on the list and realizing you're going to be sitting there for 8 hours before you get into court, those days are gone. I hope they're gone. Because certainly the ministry's done a lot of work to reduce the redundancies and try and improve the efficiencies. It was long overdue and long needed in the system. So in a sense, the pandemic presented an opportunity to capitalize, out of necessity to capitalize. The pandemic has also brought about some other opportunities. So if I'm a young student coming out, now the traditional business model is no longer. It's a new business model now. So there's great opportunities there. One of them, as you spoke to, is being the ability to not only be commissioner as a paralegal, but notarizing documents. These are two tools you could add to your tool belt as a paralegal now, and providing services to the public that didn't exist before. And part of it was advocation. We've been advocating for these for a long time. What precipitated the changes was the current environment. Um, the key stakeholders in the industry realized, okay, this is about servicing the public. The public needs these services. How can we deliver these services to the public in the most efficient manner? And so this is where the virtual and digital commissioning and notarizing essentially grew out of. It had always been there, but traditionally not really utilized. And so again, creates a brand new opportunity. And this is just one of many. There are many, many opportunities with COVID. And so it's not all doom and gloom. In fact, I would suggest it's the opposite. For new students that are coming out, this is a fantastic opportunity. No longer do you have to fit into the square peg that has been the way to practice law for the last 500 years. It's now an opportunity to look for new ways to service the public and drive business. Of course, you're still limited in your creativeness. We have all kinds of obligations to the public. But as far as looking for new opportunities to generate business, new ways to service clients, the pandemic in some ways has opened up a brand new field there. And as you say, I no longer have to spend 8 hours sitting at a courtroom waiting to be called on the list. I can now schedule it right in my calendar. That certainly makes me more efficient as a legal practitioner, because now that 8 hours I'd be sitting at the court, I'm exaggerating, 8. I've never actually sat 8, but although I've heard some horror stories, instead of sitting there for 8 hours, now I can be servicing other clients and providing services to other clients, or utilizing my skills or my time in more productive ways. than waiting to be called on the list. So there's plenty of opportunities out there. I don't profess to have all the ideas, and I would suggest the younger generation that's coming in, these will be the paralegals that will bring the new, fresh ideas, ways of looking at doing business. So I tend to have a business mindset because it's what I've always been framed around. So I see these opportunities as huge for new paralegals coming in to look at different ways to not only deliver services to the public, because that's ultimately what we do, but find different ways to generate business. If you told me a year ago or 2 years ago that paralegals would be commissioning documents, or they would be a notary public, that would be part of their business model, that would be a tool they'd have in their tool belt, I would have thought, wow, I would never would have thought that. So, and it came about fairly quickly as far as enacting. We've been advocating for a while, many years, but when the stakeholders realized that they had to make this decision for the public interest, it didn't take long for that to enact. So I'm hoping that also leads to improvements in access to justice, because sometimes the frustration that we all have as practitioners in this field is some of the bureaucracy around enabling access to justice. So when we get these great moments where when we can see the benefit of having that access to justice, hopefully that will really catalyze the decision makers in the process and sort of revolutionize that process as well, although I'm not holding my breath.
I see a question here now. I'm not sure if you do provincial offenses or criminal matters, but what effect do you think the pandemic would have with respect to any Jordan or 11B applications? Because on the other end, there are people who still are wanting to deal with this, and the choices might be, well, you have to run a Zoom trial where the issues that you brought up, well, somebody could be coached, or credibility issues can't be properly canvassed,
Yeah.
or they just aren't able to operate at all, and you're just waiting, and there's probably a greater and greater backlog as a result. Do you think there's going to be anything with respect to how those applications are processed?
Yeah, you raise an interesting question, and I think all of us in the legal service industry are asking the same questions. My gut feel is this is a gray area. It's a gray area because it hasn't reached the appellate levels yet. And there are so many issues. I mean, the amount of issues that COVID has created, so the negative environment of COVID, has also produced some positives in that there's some brand new areas of law that have never been encroached on, and they haven't been tested yet. And this is one of the areas that has not been tested at the appellate level. And we're sort of taking the wait and see approach. It's going to happen eventually. And I'll give you another example, John Paul. This is a very common example, is all the employment ramifications of COVID. And even with the vaccination coming out, what are the implications of my employer mandating that I must get a vaccination? I mean, that question in of itself presents a whole brand new area of law that is unwritten and untested, to be frank. So I think we're, for the most part, taking the wait and see approach, and eventually these will filter up to the appellate level, and we'll see what the Ontario Court of Appeal rules and how they rule in certain areas, and whether that will apply across the board. And then, of course, eventually it'll end up the Supreme Court, and particularly around the Jordan issues and the charter issues. But there are also other issues at the Ontario Court of Appeal that we'll be waiting anxiously to see how they rule. going forward. So again, it's a brand new, we're in a brand new time for law. We haven't seen this kind of change in law that I can think of since maybe back in the 60s when small claims court was actually created. It's really been that long since we've seen this kind of wholesale change to the traditional laws, the way they've been written, and the precedents that's been set. So I didn't really answer your question because I think it's a wait and see. I think it's a huge gray area, and gray meaning there's been no decisions at the appellate levels yet. And so in some ways that's exciting because it presents lots of opportunities, presents new arguments, presents new ways to analyze a case and advocate for your client, new ways that didn't exist before COVID. So, in that sense, it's exciting, and we're kind of all sitting on the edge of our seats waiting to see how the court is going to rule, and tribunals, to a lesser extent, the more so the Ontario Court of Appeal, looking to see how they rule on these particular matters. I should just mention with the administrative tribunals, it's a lot easier for the government because they are administrative tribunals, driven by what's in the Act. So it's a lot easier for the government to amend the Act according to the conditions of COVID, and then put the framing around what the boards can do in that legislation. So that's a little bit of a different challenge, a little easier for the government to manage on that aspect. When it comes to charter issues, quasi-criminal, which paralegals can represent, and some of those other traditional areas of the court side of the legal industry, we're all waiting on the edge of our seats to see how the Ontario Court of Appeal and probably ultimately a Supreme Court will rule. There's been a few cases I've been following closely, but they're not at that levels yet. So it's more of a wait and see.
Now, another thing that came up here from since we're discussing was there was a case, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with. It was a mother had dropped off her kid, I don't know if it was one or two kids, to the grandparents' place, and or her parents' place, to their grandparents, and I guess the neighbors saw the car, and then they called the police, and then she got pulled over, and then there was charges for violating the physical and social distancing laws. And I saw that a couple of paralegals were trying to take the case on pro bono. So a couple of aspects here. One, if I don't know if you're familiar with it, if you have anything to share about that. But two is that the OPA do any sort of pro bono or organized collectively to do things where there is cases at maybe the landlord tenant board or another tribunal or the courts that the organization can kind of get advocacy through its membership?
Yeah, okay, great question. Kind of two separate trains of thought. I have not followed the case closely enough in the through the hearing process. I'm familiar with it. Obviously, I saw it in the news like everybody else. It raises a very interesting component of law for me. I mooted when I was going to Humber for the 4 years. And traditionally, mooting is basically oral advocacy. Traditionally, it's been an activity that lawyers have participated in law school, and it's not been available to paralegals. Fortunately, with my colleague and I, when we started the Paralegal Cup in 2013, we essentially launched mooting to the paralegal community. We felt that paralegals are no different than lawyers. We're advocating every day. We're doing the exact same, we're playing the exact same role, utilizing the exact same skills, oral advocacy, to the decision maker. So there's no reason why we shouldn't be mooting, because that's a practice environment. Nobody's freedoms are in jeopardy. And the fact that it's charter law and typically paralegals don't deal in charter law makes it even more of a reason why we should be doing it, because it's a good educational learning experience. And of course, charter is always the most difficult area of law to be very successful as an oral advocate. So the reason I bring that up, and to tie back to my previous statement of plenty of opportunity that's coming out of COVID, traditionally in mooting, or when you're presenting a chartered-based appeal, there are the substantive part of the law that you would be advocating on, and then there's a policy component, because at the levels of the Ontario Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court, they not only have to consider the law, they have to consider the implications of the decision they make on society as a whole. So traditionally, they have been complementary, those two pieces, and policies, usually what it's referred to, would usually be, in most cases, there are a few cases where a policy was more prevalent than the actual substantive part of the law. But traditionally, policy has been a sort of a secondary consideration that the courts have made. That area now has blown up. So now policy becomes far more important than it had in the past. So these decisions now are going, I feel, and my gut tells me, are going to be far more policy laden than they are substantive. And to relate that to, I guess, everyday terms, if we take this case, for example, I remember her saying, well, I mean, they could have just given me a warning. They didn't have to write me a ticket for $800. So then you think in your mind, okay, well, what is the obligation on you as a citizen, right? You know you shouldn't be doing this. You know you're doing something you shouldn't be doing. You did it anyway. And now you're complaining about the implications of, the outcome from your actions. So these are the things that the court is going to be considering, particularly if we look at employment law, for example, employer mandating that you get a needle. Well, that will never happen in Canada. Maybe, maybe not, because the policy considerations may far outweigh the individual rights. So as you know, with the charter argument, they're always a balancing act to look at. They also have to look at the policy. So basically, for lack of a better term, what's best for the greater good can sometimes trump individual rights under the charter. And so that's the role policy is in play. And it doesn't really come into effect. I mean, there's a few landmark cases, the doctor's case with immigration, and a few others through the years. The other one was the legalization of prostitution. That was another case where policy was far more substantive than the actual substantive law argument itself. So I think these COVID times present plenty of policy arguments. And that's, I feel, an area of the law that is much more challenging. Well, at least I found it when I was mooting, much more challenging, because they're more of a poli-sci related type argument, as opposed to a pure law interpretation of the law. And so in this situation, I could surely see the court saying, well, you have a certain obligation as a citizen in this society to protect others. And one of those obligations is not to do things that contradict what the current Emergency Measures Act says. The reason the Emergency Measures Act is in place is to protect the greater public. So in this particular case, the safety of the greater public would trump your individual rights. Now, we haven't really seen that play out. As I said, we have not seen it play out at the appellate levels yet. And so we're sort of waiting to see what the policy is. And I think it's ongoing and it's evolving. It's the state of play is it's a constant moving target right now. It's not settled law, and the policy, like COVID, seems to be changing every 3-4 months. And so I think we'll have to wait and see when it gets to those appellate levels, how it plays out there. But again, going back to that particular case, you now can make a policy argument. Now, you're probably not going to make a policy argument at first appearance. But when that case or the potential for that case moves up the ranks and starts to get more to the appellate level, then you're looking at more of a policy consideration, because the implications of that that decision for the court will weigh far more heavily on the policy than it will on the particular law, substantive law of the case. So, as far as the OPA orally advocating, we do not orally advocate on any particular cases. So we don't do amicus. We don't. Where we advocate as an organization is with the Law Society of Ontario, with the Ministry of the Attorney General, and with the other stakeholders in the community. And we do come to the table. We do present substantive and policy oral advocacy in those environments. Typically, they are in camera, which means they're not open to the public. So, for instance, when the decision came, Justice Bonatanco's decision came from family law, the Paralegal Association of Ontario, the Ontario Paralegal Association was at the table with all the other players in the industry in making up, looking at the recommendations from the court, doing the subcommittee breakouts. And so we're doing a lot behind the scenes on the policy side. And the position, at least currently for the organization, has been for some time, is to work collaboratively in the background on the policy with the decision makers. So typically we're not out on the front page of the newspaper advocating on any particular case. I would not rule it out at some point in the future. It certainly hasn't been the role the organization has played to date. The energy has really been focused on working with key stakeholders, which, the big two are our regulators, the Law Society of Ontario and the Ministry of the Attorney General. So we're in constant communication and constant working groups with them on all kinds of issues that are taking place through the process, I guess, before the changes come about. So
Perfect.
hopefully that helps answer your question a little bit. And I don't want to speak for the organization, by the way. I'm just the chair of the education committee. I certainly don't speak for the president or any of the board members, but no, I'm just giving you my personal sense of from where I sit and my knowledge of the organization. They're really involved behind the scenes more with the stakeholders. And I guess if I'm going to put the mindset around the Ontario Paralegal Association, it's more globally. It's more of an overview rather than any one in particular case. But again, that could change if something does come up. That could certainly change. I mean, I know there's certain areas right now that are very contentious. One of them being immigration, for example. I know the organization maintains and continues to maintain their stance and posture that we will work with the interested stakeholders at the table, not on the front page of the newspaper, but behind the scenes. We will work with them using diplomacy and negotiation and discussion. So we're fully engaged in that sense. It's just not something that's always in the public eye. But I wouldn't hesitate to encourage anybody to reach out to the president at any time. He'll be more than happy to explain all the different initiatives that the Ontario Paralegal Association is involved with. They're the only organization that's recognized by the regulators, Law Society of Ontario and the Ministry of the Attorney General. So we are the voice of paralegals at that table. So it's a really key and important role, and it's one that I know the organization takes very seriously. And so generally when we go into these discussions with the other stakeholders, that's the position we're generally taking. It's a more broader aspect for all paralegals in Ontario. But great
So, so
question.
So thank you so much, Doug, for taking the time here and joining us here tonight. Perhaps maybe you can tell my students, I do have some very new students, so it's perfect time. Maybe you can tell them about becoming or how they can become student members of the OPA. And as well, perhaps you can share some final words of advice for students as they look to transition from being students to being licensed paralegals in the near future.
Yeah, so Ontario Paralegal Association has a huge contingent of students, and they're really a driving force in the organization. A lot of the innovation comes from there. I personally have a lot of passion for students. It just happens to be one of my personal passions. You know, you live in this environment of being a student. It's not a real world, and you live in that environment, and then like that, you're expected to switch gears to, you know, the regular working world. And that's not an easy transition to make because student life is not reality. You know, the deadlines, the hours you keep, all those wonderful things, uh, you know, is not the reality of what it's like to be in the working world. So making that transition is a huge endeavor. And I think it's a lot of times it's underestimated, the amount of effort that's required to get there. But they can certainly sign up. We have a student rate for students because we understand they're on a budget. I think it's $15, if I'm not mistaken, this year. And we did lower our membership fees this year as well because of COVID. And it's not just students, it's the entire community. All of our communities are really hurting during these times financially. So they can go to opaonline.ca, and there's join us button right there, so they can just click there and sign in. um, don't hesitate to contact me if you have more questions. uh, I can leave my email. It's chair.education@opaonline.ca. And also the president, he's fully available to interact with the public and any members. So he's president at opaonline.ca, and that's George Brown is his name. So I'd encourage anyone to reach out if they have more questions. Reach out and join someone, talk to someone who's been involved with them before. What the organization needs is new ideas. The organization needs new energy, like any organization does, not just ours, but any organization does. And I think that for me, that's one of the reasons I'm very passionate about students, because they can bring a different angle, a different perspective, maybe some new and fresh ideas. And I think this time that we live in now in the legal field is absolutely ripe for new, fresh thinking. You know, you've been doing this a long time, Jean Paul. I don't know if you've ever seen an opportunity, a wholesale opportunity to change the entire way an entire industry is run because of COVID. I'm sure there are others, but certainly ours, like I said, this really hasn't come about for probably the 60s would be the last time. That's when the small claims court was created, you know, back in the civil rights movement. So this is really an opportunity. And I would encourage those students to reach out and, you know, even attend a virtual event, go into one of those rooms, ask some questions. You don't necessarily have to sign up. If you're not sure, ask questions, reach out to someone, myself or anybody else who's involved with the organization. And the other thing for me is my biggest encouragement for students is to reach out and get involved, because that's how you're going to not only improve yourself, you're going to help with your transition into the real world, out of the student world of studying up till you know 1 in the morning and then going and working. And you'll help yourself, and you'll also build your skill sets so that you can be more successful when you do fully transition to licensing. And you've already then established some connections in the community. And so, you know, like I did myself, I just reached out. I saw someone I liked, I met them, you know, I called them, I said, you know, can I do this? Can I do that? And in fact, in sometimes after, you know, a certain amount of time, my mentor would actually say to the judge, Your Honor, Doug Taylor's here. He's a student, paralegal student right now, and he's attending with me. Are you okay? So he would actually get the blessing of the court and make everybody fully aware. So, you know, it wasn't like I was just tagging along. He would actually introduce me. And I thought, wow, okay, that's kind of a big deal. You know, now my name's going out there. I'm not licensed, but my name's going out there. And so when I do make that transition, there might be one or two people that actually remember me. So, and that's not a initial thought that came through when I stepped forward to volunteer. I just wanted to get some hands-on experience. That could still certainly be done in a virtual environment, although I don't know how receptive. I guess judges individually might be receptive to the virtual because there's a lot less control, as we pointed out. Um, Unlike a physical courtroom where the judge can see everything that's going on, with these virtual environments, it can be very challenging to actually see what's going on other than what's on the camera screen. So, but there are other ways to get involved. I used to help draft. Um, so my mentor would say, okay, well, here's you know, here, take this and draft a claim. Of course, the client gave authorization. They talk to their client, say, hey, I have a student that's working with me. Are you okay if I share this information with them? And so 9 times out of 10, client does, you know, uh, they're usually okay with it. The more people they have helping them, the better, right? Doesn't cost them any more money. So, so generally that's what would happen. The client would agree, and then my mentor would give that writing to me, and it was great real life practice. And above and beyond school, there was that added component of, okay, this is actually, you know, somebody's um, there's something at stake. There's a jeopardy at stake here that doesn't come in school where you're dealing in you know, completely fictitious environments. This is a real person. These are real facts. This is a real situation. There's real implications and outcomes from this, and so that gives you you know, sort of a taste of what it's like to be a legal practitioner versus a student, and that certainly helps your mind to transition into that professional role. So I would definitely encourage students to reach out at every opportunity they can to get involved, find a mentor. If they don't have one, the Law Society also provides another free service, which is providing a mentorship. So they have a mentorship program, which is called yeah, it's CAN. Sorry,
Coach and Advisor Network, right?
that's right, Coach and Advisor Network. Now, I don't know if that's open to students. That I don't know the answer to. I know for licensees, absolutely. If I'm brand new licensee, I just finished writing my exam, I've gotten my license in the mail. The first thing I'm going to do is reach out to a mentor, find a mentor in the community, somebody you can lean on and call. And, you know, I'm not sure, I'm setting up my business name. What do you think I should pick for my business name? It doesn't matter what the question is, to have somebody there, an advisor, you know, a trusted member of that community that's been there and done that, is hugely valuable, hugely valuable. It will save you a lot of time, save you a lot of money, it'll save you a lot of stress. And it also helps you stay connected. And that's really the theme of, you know, I think what we've been mostly focusing on is that connectiveness that we seem to have lost with COVID. So definitely reaching out and getting a mentor is, and I would even do it as a student personally, but that's a sense to, that's another way you can have that sense of community and keep connected.
Perfect. So thanks again, Doug. And I think
Perfect. Thank you.
I was just going to say that one of the things that I noticed with paralegal education is sometimes the internship hours are not enough. But as you mentioned, perhaps shadowing after the fact would be something that students can benefit from while they're transitioning, waiting to write the licensing exams and stuff like that. I think that would be a great project.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can tell you from my personal experience, I did not have enough education. And I don't think you'll find a paralegal out there that says, oh, yeah, we have more than enough. And in fact, I can share one of my professors who has her PhD in law. at Humber. She's been practicing family law for 20 years. She said to me, "Do you think law school provided me the training to become a family lawyer?" Because it didn't. I had no idea. I had to learn the hard way. I had to come out, open a practice, learn the best practices, what to do, what not to do. I lost money. I made some bad decisions. All of this was in the early stages of being a lawyer. I didn't learn any of that in law school. Law school doesn't teach you that. So do you think that paralegal education is any different? So in that sense, lawyers and paralegals are coming from the same place. Um, and again, this is probably why we're lifelong students. You can never really fully teach that. And some of those skills you can never teach, they're practical skills. And the only way you're going to gain that is through trial and error and reaching out to the community and finding a mentor that you trust, that you can rely on to give you good advice. Because they can help steer you away from those pitfalls as much as possible. And I know it's something OPA's been, we've advocated for a long time about higher education. So I don't think that's an issue. There are other players at the table that, there's some other considerations to take into account. But certainly I would be 100% in agreement with you there. Education is never going to cover everything. And this is where reaching out and finding a mentor, even classmates. I still have classmates I keep in touch with that I went to school with, because for me, it's great. It's a great pulse for them, right? Oh, I see you're doing this. Oh, that's great. And so again, it's that community. I have someone there, someone in my community I can call, or I can pick their brain and say, hey, I noticed you're doing WSIB stuff. I have this situation that's come up. What would you do? So you're now talking to a colleague, even though that's someone you went to school with, right? So they're no different than any other practitioner, but I would definitely encourage students to reach out. Yeah, number one.
Thanks again, Doug, and
Okay,
certainly hope you everyone here enjoyed listening to Doug, and all the best as we navigate through these uncertain times, and best of luck in the position of chair at the education committee there at the OPA.
thank you so much, Jean Paul. I really appreciate your time. And again, this is a great initiative. I think the more folks we can get out talking about this industry, the better it is for everybody involved, including the public. So I think it's a great thing. And I would love to come back sometime. So
Yeah, tell your
anytime you have
colleagues.
the,
Love to have people. I think I know we're, and certainly thanks Rochelle for working really hard at bringing a lot of our guests. I think we're well over 200 now since we started
fantastic.
this during
That's great.
the COVID. So it's always trying to get perspective. And certainly one of the things maybe we could work with the OP is a lot of the stuff is useful for young paralegals that we can certainly share. I think you can get the CPD hours. I was working on that with the Law Society. I mean, you got to accredit the professional part, but I mean, just the substantive stuff you can get, I think, from
Oh my
watching the
gosh, yeah.
videos as well too.
Oh yes, definitely, definitely. And even most senior practitioners in the field, and you can attest to this, you still learn something every day. And that's one of the great things
Yeah, I
about
think I'm
this
the
area.
greatest beneficiary of this, because there's 250 some odd hours of free legal knowledge and education. So thanks
Yeah.
again, and all
Okay,
the
great.
best, and
Thank you.
take care.
Okay, thanks. Take care.
So
Thank
much,
you.
Mr. Doug Taylor, and thank you so much, JP, for hosting, and thank you for our special guest, Benita Query. She will be